Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 19th episode of A QISSAA with Ishika, quintessential and inspiring stories of South Asian artists, funded by the California Arts Council Individual Artist Fellow Grant. My name is Ishika Muchal, and I'm coming to you from the ancestral and unceded lands of the Tongva, Gabrielino Tongva people, also known as Los Angeles, California. I am so excited to welcome my guest today, Aparna Kumar, a Bharatanatyam dancer and creative content specialist at Netflix. With experience working in films and documentaries, she started her journey in marketing production at Syfy in New York, worked with agencies and clients including Sesame Street. And in her current role with Netflix, she works in the AV Studio creative content team in collaboration with Publicity and Marketing to create, capture, and execute campaign materials to publicize characters on and off set. This includes hiring crews to capture BTS footage and interviews, producing and directing shoots, working with talent and filmmakers, overseeing edit, post-production of video assets, managing video crews at red carpets, and more. Aparna is also a classically trained Bharatanatyam dancer, having finished her solo dance recital called Arangetram. She is invested in bringing a progressive discourse to the South Asian diaspora, particularly surrounding issues of class and caste. I am so honored to welcome Aparna Kumar.
Hi, Ishika. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me. Yeah, so let's get started. How did you get introduced to content creation?
It's funny. I think I kind of knew very young that I wanted to work in entertainment in some capacity, like even in middle school. My brother's 9 years older than me, and he's an editor. And so he sort of like, I feel like I grew up watching movies with him, and like he was shooting home videos constantly, like my entire childhood is documented on camera. And he like even harder than me was very gung-ho about working in film and like wanted to be a director when he was like in elementary school. And so I feel like I kind of got that from him. And I don't know, I felt like it was we didn't have any other people in the community that we modeled after wanting to do this. So for me, it was very much my brother. And I don't know, for him, like it was just something that came from within him.
Yeah, and what made you decide to pursue it as a career?
I honestly struggled with that decision growing up. I grew up in Dallas, and so it was also very much like Dallas has a really big South Asian community, and it sort of started to really grow when I was getting like towards high school. I think my parents immigrated to New York originally, moved to Texas, and there weren't as many South Asian people when I was really little. And I've always been interested in a number of different things, like politics and like a lot of liberal arts related stuff that I toyed with that being my path, like public policy, like things like that I considered going into. And then ultimately I realized like, no, I think I just like love movies and wanted to work in entertainment. And it was as simple as that. And it's not that my parents were hesitant. They never outright said like, you can't do this. But I think compared to my brother being a woman, they had this image of like, oh my God, you're going to be working like on sets, like with a bunch of big men, like working late nights. Like they just like kind of went off and had this like idea of what working in entertainment looked like.
Yeah.
And I was just determined like, okay, I'm going to do what I want to do. Like your idea of what this is may not be what reality is. And so ultimately I think they ended up supporting that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Standing your ground. And
with lazy parents, it's a hard thing to do sometimes.
Yeah. And can you describe what you do in your job? Like, can you just take us behind the scenes of a project that you've worked on and how you create and film content?
Yeah, yeah. I guess I'll start just quickly sort of with what I worked in New York previously. I live in LA now.
Mhm.
And I interned on the marketing production team at Syfy at NBC when I was in college. And so that
Yeah.
was sort of like I didn't really know what that was. I think that marketing production specifically is not something you're like taught and introduced as a career
Mhm.
path within this industry. So we basically worked on a lot of like promo ad work for the network. And so that was sort of that was my entry point, I think, into my career was solely through like marketing production and
Mhm.
video production within that realm. And so now at Netflix, I work on a team called AB Studio, and we sort of roll under publicity, but I work pretty closely with publicity and marketing. And we basically I'm on the film side. So as soon as a film is greenlit, we kind of get someone on our team is assigned the project. And at that point, we're part of the conversations with the filmmakers pretty early, even before
Mhm.
they start shooting. And then I'll get a script and I'll read through the script and then sort of decide what interesting angles we would want to take in terms of
Mhm.
marketing the film and marketing the project. And it's often a very close conversation between all of these different internal teams of like what is really good about this movie, what do we want to market about the film. And so usually even from the point of getting a script I'll be like, okay, these are like interesting beats within the story that when they
Mhm.
actually start production and we get a production schedule, I'll usually hire a behind the scenes videographer crew to go on set, capture behind the scenes content just of like actors and people and crews and stuff shooting or and like during the actual production itself. And then depending on the caliber of talent, if it's A-list celebrity talent, it's like a big director. If it's a big action movie, like if there's all depending on what the film and the project is, we'll do interviews with talent and then we'll have all these raw materials that we're kind of sitting on of like what do we do with this at the end of the day once we actually
Right.
decide what the campaign is going to look like overall? And then I'll work to craft with my usually a post-production house that I like and hire. We'll kind of work on a story that we want to tell and create. And if we don't get what we want from set, then we'll do special content day shoots separately from that. So those shoot days I'll produce and direct crews and talent. And like I interviewed some A-list talent before too and have directed people. So it's like a very hands-on dynamic job.
Mhm.
It's a lot. It's really cool, and I feel like I feel very integrated into the project, and so when a movie comes out, I feel very invested in it, so it's exciting,
Yeah.
it's really cool.
That sounds amazing. So all the fun little videos and posts and the character interviews that we see on like social media, we can attribute those to your team.
Yeah, a lot of those do come from my team, especially if you see, like I think a lot of either other, companies and stuff that aren't just entertainment studios, like Vanity Fair, GQ, like, they do similar things where
Mhm.
you see, like, a white background and talent sitting in a chair, and sometimes those are, like, social specific shoots that are, like, what a cast of Stranger Things reacts to, like, funny tweets about them, stuff like that,
Right.
so
Okay, those are some of the most entertaining things, so that's amazing.
yeah, they're super fun.
Yeah, and you were talking about how you have to hire production crews and, videographers, etcetera, for shoot days, so what do you look for in a collaborator when creating content?
It's really interesting, I think just given the different nature of everything we work on, like, I have found it in a place where I have, like, a Rolodex, my team kinda has a Rolodex of agencies and people that we collaborate with that we know their strengths, and so if a
Mhm.
movie is, like, very art house and, like, a little experimental, we kind of want an agency to understand that sensibility if they're gonna work on
Mm.
something with us, so you wouldn't hire an agency that's, like, really good and really strong at action to do, like, a kids movie. I don't know, like, those you
Right,
kind of, like
yeah.
I look for people who know a genre really well and, like, based on how their team is staffed and what their collaborative, like, ideation process is on some of these ideas, like, I want someone to fit whatever genre I'm working on because I had a few kids titles come out in the summer, and there was one agency that I love to death, but they were just not right for this project, so I didn't go with
Mm.
them, and I was so excited to hire them again for another movie I recently worked on, so it just is always an ongoing conversation about what the campaign looks like, what the genre of the film looks like, and
Mhm.
it definitely depends.
Yeah, absolutely. to find someone that aligns and knows your project and setting
Totally.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have pretty close collaborators that, like, work regularly with Netflix, whether it's our team or someone on a different team, and, like, Netflix is such a huge company, and there's so many people vying to do the similar things, and so sometimes my
Mhm.
team is wrangling the social team, and we'll kind of consolidate our ideas together and do one shoot together, and so instead of us separately working with different agencies and, like, external partners, we have to have those
Oh,
conversations internally and, like, let's do this together, like, let's save money, and if we pull our
right.
weight together, like, sometimes that doesn't happen, you'd be surprised. People are, like, doing their own thing and asking talent to do the same questions. It ends up being, like, these it's such a big machine, and everyone's so excited to work on specific projects that
Right.
we don't actually, like, talk all the time, and we should
Yeah.
be, so
Communication
yeah.
is absolutely key. Have you had a project that you've worked on that's been your favorite so far?
It's funny, I think I love a lot of the stuff I'm working on now, but I think kinda going back to, I mean, even just me being, like, kind of a political person and, like, wanting a lot of stuff I do to feel like it has some sort of impact. When I
Mhm.
was in New York, I worked Sesame Street was a big client of mine at one of the post houses I worked at, and that was so
Mhm.
much fun, like, I was on set with Elmo a handful of times, it was
Oh
so
my god.
special. But one of the projects that I worked on there was, specifically geared towards, like, girls' education, and so there was a new Afghani Muppet that was introduced a year before, specifically for the Afghan version of Sesame Street, and
Mhm.
so we had, like, that character was speaking Pashto and, like, talking about going to school, and then we cut to a bunch of different Muppets from different countries and, like, talking about the
Mhm.
importance of girls' education, and so that was, like, such a fun, sweet project, and it ended up living in a lot of countries that specifically were trying to get more girls to go to school, and
Mhm.
that was, like, not only a really fun project, but just really special and, like, important to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting to see that your work has an impact beyond entertainment is so powerful.
Yeah,
That's
that's
awesome.
I feel like that's the goal for so many of us in this industry.
Oh, yeah. Same, absolutely. And, can you speak to some of the early challenges that you've had in your journey?
It's interesting. I think this is something I could talk endlessly about, but I think, like, there's such a stigma, I think, within the South Asian community of pursuing a career in entertainment or, like, pursuing
Mhm.
a career that's not, your traditional medicine, business, whatever, and I feel really lucky that my parents, as hesitant as they were initially, like, both of them have science backgrounds, like, my
Mhm.
dad had a PhD, my mom is a like, they just it's the usual story that we often hear, right? And they ended up being really supportive, I think, of my brother and I doing this, but my dad passed away when I was a sophomore in college, and so I think for me, that was really, like, a key for me of, like, I need to really start taking on some responsibility for what I wanna do and not,
Mhm.
like, feel my parents, like, couldn't financially support everything I wanted to do, and I feel like after he passed away, I became kind of independent financially in some
Mhm.
ways, and so even so many of these jobs that we take in entertainment at the beginning of our careers, especially, like, working as a PA on set, like,
Right.
writing a project with your friends, like, you have to self-fund some of that stuff or, like, be okay
Mhm.
with it not paying well, and so I really needed to balance, like, taking care of myself and taking care of
Mhm.
my mom and my brother, but then also, like, moving my career forward in the way that I wanted it to, and, like, where could I take those risks? Where could I take an unpaid internship? Where could I take, like, an editing job that didn't pay well? And
Mhm.
so I think that was a very real challenge for me in college especially, which is, like, an important time to find yourself, but also, like,
Yeah.
I was grieving and figuring that out, and I think I'd like to think I have done well for myself since then, but definitely was a
Yeah.
challenge for me in the beginning.
Mhm. That's such a tricky part of this industry is always like you were saying, finding what you can accept, that doesn't have pay, but, like, fulfills you artistically. What
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think, like, there's such a caste system within this industry where
yeah.
there really is the most privileged people can come in and take these unpaid internships and work these, like, low-level jobs, like as assistants for executives, and not get paid very well, and they're connected somehow. And that's what I feel like LA is really built on, a lot of those connections. And there's so many stereotypes that are not true about entertainment, but there's a lot that are true. And I think it's really hard to break it in here if you don't have some support system behind you, whether it's like emotional support or financial support. And
Right.
there's people that have had even bigger challenges than me. And I feel like in spite of the challenges I did have, I'm very, very aware of my privilege, and I'm very grateful for what I do have. And I want to give back in some way, however that's possible.
Yeah. And speaking of stereotyping, can I ask, how did you deal with like the lack of representation and stereotyping in this industry when you first started and now?
I think it's something I'm still figuring out. Like even in my office and in so many spaces I've occupied in my career, I've been the only South Asian person in a room, the only Asian person in a room. Like I've seen other South Asian women that have been in offices that I've worked at, that like two people I was really good friends with at Syfy worked on the like finance team, and they didn't actually work on creative marketing production with me. And so I I think I get sometimes really caught up in the fact that, like, we're not saving lives. Like, entertainment is not, especially in the midst of a pandemic and, like, so many crises that have happened. Like, Trump was elected when I was in my first year of my job, and sort of, like, navigating what my career choices were. I think,
Yeah.
like, in the midst of all of these other worldwide events that were happening, and I was like, What am I doing? Is that important?"
Yeah.
But then really seeing that I was the only person of South Asian descent in a lot of spaces I occupied, and, like, I worked on The Green Knight, the A24 movie that came out a couple years ago, and that was the first, like, official credit I had where my name was in the credits of the film, and I posted that on my Instagram story, and I had, like, 3 Desi friends from Dallas, like, "Oh my god, that's so cool, like, we never see our names in these credits, like, that's awesome." And I felt like even though I'm not this huge, like, writer that everybody knows my name, or, like, that impactful in the industry, like, just my presence, I think, is
Yeah.
really huge. And so that's something I'm trying to remember as I get
Mhm.
up for work every day, and I have, like, frustrations I'm dealing with, or, like, people
Right.
forgetting my name, or, like, conflating me with the one other South Asian person that works at the office, like, getting my name mixed up, like, that's so frustrating, and these microaggressions are real. But
Yeah.
it's I wanted to do this since I was in high school, and so that's why I'm just, like, trying to remember that.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And have you ever felt the pressure to change your identity to fit in this industry?
Yeah, it's I think it can be probably said for a lot of people, a lot of Desi people or non-white people in white spaces, of, like, code switching, and
Mhm.
what do I talk about, and, like, how do I present myself in a space, and, like, to fit more within whatever room I'm in. And
Mhm.
it's really funny. I think I'm, like, such a huge film buff and, like, a huge movie nerd, and I geek out on, like, old art house movies and stuff too from, like, the 40s and 50s, and, like, weird movies from, like, the Balkans. Like, I don't know, I have,
Yeah.
like, a lot of weird knowledge. And I think when I was in college, a lot of, like, the white film boys that I, like, hung out with, they kind of, like, it was social currency to know some of that stuff. And
Gotcha.
I
Yeah.
always felt like I wanted to keep up and, like, prove that I knew this weird stuff too, that felt like it was very, like, much part of an insular community.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I had this complex of, like, I want you to see that, like, I'm a multifaceted person that knows a lot
Yeah.
about interesting things. And I've, like, shed a lot of that in the last 10 years or so, but it's
Mhm.
something that I feel like I wanted to play the social game to fit in that type of way. And
Right.
now I think I've, like, learned to compartmentalize that stuff, where it's like, I don't want to compromise who I am in spaces of, like, proving myself, or,
Mm.
like, having someone have changed what their perception is of me. Like, we all have implicit biases of people, and my hope
Right.
is that once people start to work with me and get to know me, they're like, "Oh, Parna's really smart and interesting and has a cool perspective," and, like, I don't wanna have to morph into somebody else's perception of what that is. But it's a
Yeah.
process. Like, obviously, I'm still working on it. I haven't figured it
Yeah. It's so interesting what you mentioned about, like, I think it's like a contradiction that you felt the pressure to know these, like, weird Balkan or, like, European films to fit in with these men. but like they would never make the effort to like know, for example, a Bollywood film, you know?
Totally.
Yeah, just that contradiction is really
Yeah, and I think even that of, like, people make assumptions about me because I'm Indian and assume, like, Bollywood, right? Like, Bollywood is the
right.
first thing people think of, and I'm like, "I'm actually Tamil, I'm South
Right.
Indian." There's a really robust film industry in South
Yeah,
India
totally.
that
Yeah.
people don't know about, and
Mhm.
with RRR coming out recently, I feel like more people have expressed interest, but, like, it took
Yeah.
that long to get to this point, but
Right.
change is incremental, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you were talking about caste and class, and I know that you're really passionate about that. So, what inspires your advocacy and activism for those progressive conversations in the South Asian diaspora?
I think it's really interesting. It's been an ongoing thing that I've navigated. I think I when I was younger, I honestly didn't have too many close South Asian friends. Like I've had like a diverse group of friends since I was a kid. Like my childhood best friend, my first best friend from elementary school is Israeli, and then
Mhm.
like my like I don't know. I just feel like I've had a really interesting perspective of like
Mhm.
different people and communities since I was really young, and I say this just from, like, my own personal experience and something I'm trying to unpack, but, like, I think a lot of the class privilege within the South Asian community has rubbed against me from a younger
Mhm.
age, and, like, not that, like, my family was, like, worse bad like, didn't have money or anything like that, but I feel like
Right.
we weren't at the same, like, social strata, like, financial strata as a lot of people. My
Mhm.
parents, like, had struggled, I think, in some ways coming to the US. Like, my dad had got a postdoc in New York in pharmacology, but then couldn't find work in his field and then switched to IT, but then had very like, his luck with his job ebbed and flowed a lot, and he was
Mhm.
unemployed for periods of my childhood, and it's like I know my mom doesn't love me talking about this stuff, but it's just really important, and, like,
Yeah.
my dad I think I remember, like, we didn't have everything when I was a kid, and so that there was such a disparity because a lot of brown families did really well and, like, had big houses and had a lot of money and threw these big parties for, like, big holidays and stuff, and that was just not my experience, and I didn't
Mhm.
really understand what those differences were or, like, what that meant for me and, like, what how that would impact me growing up.
Right.
And I think the, like, caste aspect of it also informed some of it, like, we're not upper caste, and I think I didn't really understand those things until taking time to read about them as an adult of, like, where do these disparities lie? What does it mean to be, like, part of a model minority that, like, we're
Mhm.
dismantling that myth now, I think, and understanding that there's a lot of diversity in our social stratification within
Mhm.
the US, but I think those personal experiences for me of, like, feeling off as a kid, but not putting my finger on it, and then now as an adult, like, really understanding how this impacts so many of us in the
Yeah.
US and in diaspora, like, how do I take that into my life, into my career, into my, like,
Mhm.
friends, like, I'm trying to build a more diverse South Asian like, social community than I've, like,
Yeah.
had exposure to, and it's hard to find that stuff sometimes, I think, and
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know. There's a lot I can say, but I feel like those are sort of my initial, like, feelings about it from when I was younger and, like, observations that
Mhm.
I'm piecing together now.
Yeah, I appreciate what you were saying about the, like, the income stratification of the South Asian population because especially in the US, I feel like a lot of people with the model minority myth have this perception that everyone is above the poverty line, but that's not true, and we don't take into consideration when we're thinking about, like, policy, um, that, "Oh, it's not gonna impact our community," but, like, it will impact our community because not everyone is at that perceived level.
Totally, and I think people fall through the cracks and, like I said, like, I really wanna drive home that, like, I have a lot of privilege, and I
Mm,
think I want that to be clear. I'm very aware of that, but I think too, I lived so adjacent to so much more privilege than what I had, and
mhm.
I think that informed a lot of my worldview in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, not like having everything handed to me or like having big parties and like, yeah, I don't know. It sounds kind of, there was just like this keeping up with the Joneses mentality that I think exists in
Mm.
a lot of South Asian communities, especially in the suburbs of major cities.
Yeah.
And my family kind of like distance themselves from that in some ways, so that's informed a lot of my yeah, just my worldview now.
Right. Yeah. It's like that movie, I don't know if you've seen it, India Sweets and Spices.
I haven't seen it yet, yeah,
Okay.
but I used to
It
go to that grocery
definitely
store in Atwater.
same. It definitely touches on that. Maybe something to watch. It's
Yeah.
fun. And I know you talked about caste and class, but are there any other issues that you're particularly passionate about or that you've worked on?
It's interesting, I think in general, like, there's been an upswell in the last, like, 5, 6 years since, obviously since when Trump was first elected of, like, a lot of
Mhm.
people feeling this call to action and activism and stuff, and I was definitely part of that. In college, I feel like I was somewhat socially active in these ways, but I don't know, it's really hard to balance that with working sometimes where I feel like,
Mhm.
how do I infuse my, like, progressive values into my day-to-day life? And
Mhm.
I think when I first moved to LA right before the pandemic, I sort of used that as a vehicle to understand the city and, like, learning about the politics of LA and, like, what the issues are here, and, like, obviously, there's a huge unhoused issue here, like, population of
Right.
people that need help, and I feel like I definitely have, like, dabbled in some of these things and haven't had an opportunity myself to make time to fully commit, and so I feel like
Mhm.
I'm figuring out what that will look like for me in my career, like, how to infuse that stuff better
Right.
into my work, but I do think just overall, like, I think overall, at least caring about representation and having equity in that type of space, and I think even, like, labor rights, like, within union
Mhm.
stuff, because 'cause I've heard, like, I don't know, just there's a big discrepancy between, like, the studios and the unions and union workers, and I want to at least help people at my job understand why unions are essential and important, and
Yeah.
I've heard some anti-union sentiments come up before, and so I just, like, that is something that I wanna squash whenever I
Yeah.
can. Yeah,
Nip it in the bud.
totally.
Absolutely. Yeah, and for anyone who's joining us right now, I'm in conversation with Aparna Kumar, and remember to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Um, yeah, let's talk a little bit about your journey with dance. So, how did that start? How did you get into Bharatanatyam?
Yeah, I my dad was a dancer actually in
Okay.
India, and I mean, my parents put me in dance when I was 5, like, so many other parents do, like, you just start as a little kid, and I had a really tumultuous relationship with dance, I think kind of related to some of what I was saying earlier, just, like, I had felt this, like, disconnect with some other of the Indian girls in my community growing up,
Mhm.
and so I started dance when I was 5, and then I did it for, like, 5, 6 years, and I quit when I was in middle school.
Mhm.
I was, like, 11 or 12, and I just like, I had this weird shame around it, like, it's
Mhm.
so I think I felt like it was this weird, like, cultural art form that didn't fit with my life, where I didn't really have that many Indian friends, and then I went to Indian dance after school, and like, didn't know how to reconcile that for myself at the time, like, I had this weird hang up about it, and I quit, and then a few years later, my childhood friend who was in my original group with me did her Arangetram when we were in high school, and I went to her Arangetram, and then I was like, "Oh my god, I miss this, I wanna dance again," and so I
Mhm.
started again my junior year of high school, did it for 2 years, and then had to leave for college, so it was,
Right.
like, this on-off period, and I think I didn't dance at all in college, and then when I moved to New York, I was looking for something, like, something to do, like, have a post outside of work, like, activity, and
Mhm.
I went to the Ganesh temple in Queens, if anyone has been, and I saw an ad for Bharatanatyam classes, and it just, like, the wheel started turning for me again, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Maybe I should pick up dance again." So for the 3rd time in life, I, like, started dance again, and it was at that point that I was like, "Wait, I really miss this and, like, really, really love this," and I had
Mhm.
felt so much regret of quitting and having these, like, on-off periods,
Mhm.
and yeah, I don't know, that was sort of my dance journey, like, coming back to it in different stages of my life.
Yeah, and I remember you telling me earlier about how you came back and did your Arangetram properly at 26, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I had started dance again in New York and then, like, found myself getting really, really sucked back in and would go to dance every day after work, like 4 or
Mhm.
5 days a week, and, like, got really, really serious about it, and I realized, like, it kind of goes in I have, like, a greater, like, opinion about our engagements in general that I'll get into, but
Mhm.
I realized for me personally that, like, I wanted to do my art engagement again to to give me, like, accountability to keep showing up and, like, get better and improve, and it
Mhm.
wasn't so much about, like, "Let me just do this performance because it's, like, a marker and a milestone to check off," but I was
Right.
like, "I wanna work hard and, like, have a goal and, like, dance
Mhm.
and practice every day towards something," so I called my childhood dance teacher in Dallas again. I hadn't talked to her in, like, I think almost 10 years, and I just called her and was like, "Auntie, I really wanna do my art engagement. I started dancing again in New York, and I'm very
Mhm.
serious about it now." And so she and I just talked, and, like, I moved back to Dallas with my mom. I quit my job in New York and
Mhm.
just decided to dedicate myself to dance for a whole year and, like, left
Yeah.
my career, my friends, and, like, my life that I loved in New York behind to focus on dance and do my art engagement.
Mhm.
And yeah, I did my engagement when I was 26, like, in 2019? 2019 is when I did it, yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk about your relationship with Arangetrams? Because I remember the conversation we had was very, very enlightening.
Yeah, I mean, this all of it sort of ties back together where I do feel like I mean, our engagements have become such an institution of, like, class privilege, wealth privilege, and of, like, a social status point for, I think, a
Right.
lot of people, and I know that so many people who do their engagements like, have genuinely worked hard to do them, but
Mhm.
the amount of, like, pomp and circumstance that goes into these things, and it's like
Mhm.
it becomes a marker of, like, are you a good dancer or not? Did you do your engagement? Are you a good dancer? Rather than, like, have you, like, worked hard to do
Right.
this art form? And I don't know, I think my art engagement felt very personal, and I invited, like, a small number of people. I, like, didn't spend that much money on this process, and I feel very, very passionate about, like, an art engagement should be a personal thing and not be a
Right.
thing for you to wield as, like, a social tool in some ways, and
Mhm.
I think too, especially that since I've been learning about the history of Bharatanatyam and the problematic history of Bharatanatyam and, like,
Mhm.
there's so much to get into with it, and, like, a friend of mine who is she comes from a hereditary community of dancers. Her name is Nritya Pillai, and she's from Chennai.
Mhm.
She's spoken a lot about some of the, like, upper caste, like, appropriation of Bharatanatyam
Right.
essentially and what it has become, and I think the Arangetram is sort of wrapped into that larger issue.
Mhm.
So it's funny because I like talking about my engagement because it was such an impactful experience for me, and I came back to it in an unconventional way, but
Mhm.
sometimes I don't like to dwell on it because I don't want that to be a marker of, like, "Oh, Aparna's a good dancer, like, she did her Arange drum," 'cause
Mhm.
I know so many, like, amazing, talented dancers who couldn't afford an Arange drum, who didn't wanna do an Arange drum, like, didn't have the
Right.
means to for whatever reason, so, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, just using it as, like, a choice rather than a definer,
Yeah,
if that's the right word.
totally.
Yeah. And do you have any advice for aspiring South Asian artists, especially female South Asian artists who are entering the field of dance or content creation or just entertainment?
Yeah, I am so excited to see more South Asian people in this industry and in arts in general.
Mhm.
I feel like there's a lot of baggage that some of us come into the arts careers with, right?
Yeah.
Like families or this, like, internalized idea of, like, I need to do something to participate in capitalism and, like, make money and, like, be
Mhm.
successful by these external markers of what success is, and I really hope that young people follow their intuition and their passions for wanting to do this because I don't know, there's just so few of us, I feel like, that I see in so many spaces that I'm in, like, there's so many I know that there's a ton of South Asian artists out here, but even, like I said, like, in my office, sometimes I'm like, I'm the only person. I'm like,
Right.
where are the rest of us? Like, I know we're
Yeah.
here, and there's, like, so many structural barriers to prevent some people from getting into these places, but I just really hope that connecting with people, like, I wanna be someone that is a conduit for someone to have an opportunity to, like, get an internship somewhere, or, like,
Mhm.
my hope is that I wanna make myself available for people to pursue something if they're afraid to, um, or to find hopefully, I like, to find a support system if it's not your family, if you like, your parents are not supporting you pursuing a career in the arts in some way, like, hopefully there's another person or other support systems out there that can allow you to enter into it, and, like, yeah, I don't know. It's hard. It's really hard when
Yeah.
it's easy advice to give, but then when you're in a difficult situation, then you feel like you can't pursue an artistic path, like, it's I don't know, it's easier said than done.
Yeah, I love what you said about just being a conduit for others as well, and I've noticed that in especially in, like, minority communities, especially, like, the South Asian community of artists, everyone is so willing to help each other because they know how hard it is to be, like, the only one in the room that looks like them, or and just providing that connection and that opportunity and that safety net of community is so important. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. I know, I didn't see very many people that look like me when I was listening to internship panels and stuff, and I
Yeah.
was like, "Where are the brown women that are doing this job? Like, are they out there?" Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And has there been any influential kissa, as this show is called, or episode from your life that has inspired you as a person or artist?
I think my dad and I didn't have the best relationship in life, and I we had a really complicated relationship, and I've been learning so much about him after he passed away, and, like,
Mm.
he did an Arangetram, he, like, left his family behind to pursue dance, and, like, his family wasn't supportive of him dancing. I think
Mhm.
my dad was also really into movies, like, I first
Mhm.
watched, like, the Satyajit Ray Apu trilogy because he had VHS copies of it at home, and,
Mhm.
like, I just assumed everybody, like, loved old Bengali movies, and I found out that wasn't the case, and I feel
Yeah.
like I have more compassion for my dad
Mhm.
after his death, and, like, I'm finding myself, like, really inspired by a lot of the hardships that he had faced in his life, and
Mhm.
how much art was really valuable to him, and I think he didn't have the support he needed to pursue what he wanted, and I think that kind of influenced why he might have why we might have butt heads, I think, when I was younger,
Mhm.
just the, like, generational cultural divide, and I see so much of, like, I really see a lot of myself in him and, like, finding
Mhm.
old books that he had and stuff, and, like, he has this, like, old thick book on Carnatic music that, like, I'm really excited to read, like, stuff like that, so I
Yeah,
feel like that my dad has been an inspiration to me in a way that I never expected that to be the case.
absolutely. That's really special that you can, I guess, relive his, like, not relive, but see the connections between your life and his now.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah. And do you have any current and upcoming projects that you can talk about without being under the constraints of an NDA?
Yeah. Let's see, I think so one project I'm really excited about is the sequel to Knives Out. We're doing a lot at Netflix, and I'm working on it, so
Oh, yeah.
that's I can't say much past that, but that's a really big one I'm excited about.
Mhm. Yeah, that's exciting. Um, and what is the best way for people to find your work?
Yeah, it's funny, I think a lot of my stuff is on, like, Netflix's YouTube channel, Instagram pages. A lot of the stuff that I've worked on and produced has been, like, press will have picked it up and posted about it on their platforms and stuff, so it's kind of
Mhm.
spread out, but I would really say, like, most of Netflix's, like, YouTube channels and stuff is where a lot of what I work on kinda lives where it lives permanently.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I'll link you to some stuff that I worked on, and then
Yeah,
afterward.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll share that link with everyone on social media. And also, now I know when I'm looking at, like, the credits of Netflix films and, like, socials,
Oh,
to
it
look
won't
for
be
your
the
name.
case for the Netflix projects, but that's what's really tough because like a lot of marketing stuff is you're not like credited in that way, but
Right.
for Green Knight I was, so that was like my pride and joy. I'm like, I worked on this, I have a credit in this movie. So
Right. Yeah. That's awesome. Still, like just knowing that you were a part of that collaborative creative process.
yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to share about your journey, your job, anything? Any last advice?
Yeah. I really like talking about this stuff, and I'm glad that you are starting a dialogue and having these conversations with multiple people. I also like if anyone wants to talk to me, like I'm happy to be that point of contact for like another South Asian person who wants to learn more about the industry. It's like
Right.
entertainment is a really tough place to break into, and I really feel for people who don't have connections or community, and like I was in that position once, so I just would love to offer that to somebody who wants to learn more and figure out if they can have a place and want to work in this industry.
Absolutely. I think that's really appreciated.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with me and share your journey and your viewpoints. And I'm always so inspired to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Of course. And everyone watching, thank you so much for tuning in. Stay on the lookout for an announcement about my next A QISSAA with Ishika episode. And thank you so much for joining.
Bye.
All right.